Kathleen Koch.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kathleen Koch. If I look familiar, it's because I was a CNN correspondent for about 18 years. Now I run a nonprofit called LeadersLink, and I've written a book and won some awards. But we're here to talk today about Central and Eastern Europe. And I think this is such a fascinating part of the world in these challenging times, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of the same descriptions that I have of the region, right? A region that's coming into its own, that's taking center stage, a region that has arrived, that is emancipating. And I hope some of you saw the excellent GLOBSEC Trends magazine. They even put it on the cover. It was a brave new region. Well, we are going to be talking about that today with 4 former heads of state, and some of them actually laid the groundwork for where these countries are today. But before we get to our discussion, we would like to poll the audience. So I hope you've all got the Slido app open on your phones. Pull it up on your phone, your computer, go to the Slido function. And our question is, which country in the region, Central and Eastern Europe, currently has the most political weight? Who would you say is boxing above their weight class? So as you answer the question, I would like to welcome my panel to the stage in alphabetical order because I don't want to be accused of favoritism. So first, Gordon Bajnai, who is the former Prime Minister of Hungary, Mikuláš, Dzurinda, the former Prime Minister of Slovakia, Sebastian Kurz, former Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Austria, and Mirek, Topolánek, the former Prime Minister of the Czech Republic. Gentlemen, welcome. Prime Minister Bajnai, I'd like to start with you. What stands out most to you when you look at the political dynamics in Central and Western Europe, how they've evolved over the last few decades?
Well, I just listened to your intro, and I remembered my days leaving university in 1991, Karl Marx University of Economics in Budapest. We changed its name to Budapest University of Economics, and I thought at the time that this is going to be now a linear up and up and up for all of our countries. And I thought it's easy. Now we left the Soviet bloc, we will be a capitalist market economy, we will be a Western-style democracy, we will soon join NATO, we will join EU, and soon we will live like our Austrian neighbors, which was for hundreds of years always the aspiration of Hungarians.
It sounds so easy, it sounds inevitable, right?
And that's how it sounded, as you say, but it didn't happen, I have to say. What I realized now, not now, but probably 15 years later, that each of our countries went through a very zigzagged route. Some had very long zigs. Sometimes some countries are in such a long zig now that I don't know if there will be a zag after that. In '94, Sir Ralph Dahrendorf, the legendary sociologist, came to Budapest and gave an interview. And he said, I'm afraid of this enthusiasm of these countries because you can change the political system in 6 months, you can change the economy in 6 years, but to change the social structures, it takes 60 years. Wow. So we are in year 34, and sometimes I question, are we still within the 60 years or in a Groundhog Day turning back to bad practices?
Fascinating, fascinating. Prime Minister Dzurinda, how would you describe the evolution that the region has undergone? You are a runner. Would you say this has been a marathon or a sprint?
In the past, it was a sprint, like Gordon has recently described. We were running maybe too fast, and now we face something like a relapse. But the general recognition in my head is that the center of gravity in Europe, political center of gravity, has been moved eastward.
Interesting.
With Poland at the helm of this process. If you look at the current situation, if you look at the role which is played by Poland, if you look a bit to the south, at Romania, for instance, We all know that the largest NATO base is being based in this country very recently. And then, if you raise your eyes to the north, you see the Nordics and Baltics. And this eastern flank of the EU is passing through a real transformation from an outsider to a new hope and future of the EU. This is my understanding or feeling in these days.
You know, I think this is a perfect time to see what the result of our poll is. So could Slido please put up, isn't that interesting? Could we put the results back up there? We should have a word cloud. And Poland, right? Fascinating, just as you said. So, Chancellor Kurz, what factors do you believe have driven the most significant change in this region over the last decade?
So, if I look at the region, I have a very positive view. So, probably from Austria, it looks a bit different. But if I look at the region, my feeling is that it's an economic success story. For example, if you compare bureaucracy, the growth rates in Germany, some Western European countries, to the dynamics in the region, I would still say that it has been a success story and there's still a huge potential. So I think one thing that has changed is the economic growth in Central Eastern Europe has changed the countries and has given the countries, of course, a lot of self-confidence and also increased the political influence from my perspective. I think a second driver probably in the last 10 years which has changed a lot was the migration crisis. Yeah, I think for the first time the countries in the region had a very clear approach, a very clear position, much different than the position of Western European countries like Germany or leaders in Brussels. From my perspective, they were right. Yeah, I think on a political level and how the debates went in the European Council and among the ministers, that was for the first time very different. And one thing that is, I would say, problematic in a way is if you look at the support for the European Union, especially in Western Balkans, other countries in the region. I read a survey a few weeks ago that 60% of people in the CE countries think that that they could lose their cultural identity due to European Union. If you look at the Western Balkans, for example, there was a lot of enthusiasm towards the European Union 10 years ago when I was foreign minister. Now I have the feeling that there's a lack of perspective, that there is not the same clear vision when these countries could become member states of the European Union. So I would say economically very positive, and on a political level, well, as always, ups and downs.
Prime Minister Topolánek, when you look at this region and what it has accomplished over the last generation, it really is extraordinary. But what do you think? Do you think it is going to maintain its direction? Because the political landscape is really increasingly unstable. Or do you think that some countries will start to backslide?
Yeah, I will start with some controversial thesis, maybe for Sebastian.
As always.
Yeah. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin announced in the Munich Security Conference two very dangerous theses for this region, for Central and Eastern Europe, for Baltic countries, Balkan countries, and so on. The first was the greatest tragedy of 20th century was the collapse of Soviet Union, and the second was I have to move the Europe before the 1997, before the discussion about enlargement of NATO. It is dangerous for all countries from this former Soviet Union bloc. Yeah? But I think we have to start, when we would like to understand this region, Central Europe, we have to understand 20th century in the whole 100 years. the greatest tragedy of 20th century was the collapse of Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Mickey won't agree with me, but it was start of this disillusion, frustration, dissatisfaction, and so on. These totalitarian regimes during 20th century influence and touch these countries very, very strongly. And now we are 35 years after Velvet Revolution, 25 years after accession of Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic to the NATO, 20 years after the accession of Slovakia. We are 20 years after the entry to European Union family. We are 70 years after accession to the Schengen area, Schengen agreement. It's amazing. We have to be proud and satisfied. Why? We are not so proud and satisfied. And we have to find the reasons of this frustration, disillusion, dissatisfaction. We don't understand each other in this region. It is not easy, historically. And now I'm able to identify 3 reasons. The first is we don't understand, generally, we don't understand this new wars, these culture wars about gender, about migration, about climate changes and so on. Not me, but people generally in these countries. That's why we can identify many political changes. The better development of politically. We don't feel safe politically, geopolitically, energy-wise. I don't know exactly which fields. It's first. The second reason is we don't feel secure, safe, because the Western European countries don't understand our fear from Russia, fascist, imperialist country. All the time attack your neighbors and try to arrange buffer zone for imperial interests. It's not so easy to understand it.
And what's number 3?
Spain guys don't understand so as Poland. 100 years under the imperialistic kingdom of Russia. And the third, economically, we are going down. It's not easy to explain people you will be poorer, because we will have more expensive energy. We will leave our heavy industry and industrial dominance and so on. It is not easy, and people are divided. Society is divided, and it is some result of this is visible in the elections.
You describe much of the world, I think, right now.
Mm-hmm.
People struggling economically, etc.
Of course.
Prime Minister Bajnai, what is going to happen in Hungary? Is this a permanent state of affairs?
Nothing is permanent in politics, but I'm not a political analyst. It's a long zag, as I said at the beginning. That's my hope. There are massive structural changes in Hungary. In Hungary, it's not just democratic bad 4 years or 8 years or 12 years. I think there are structural changes to how the country operates in terms of the economy, and most importantly, the mentality of the people. There is a very well-crafted long-term plan. Well-crafted, I don't mean it positively, but well-considered plan to make a significant part of the population again dependent on state redistribution, because that gives a lot of power to politicians. If the teachers are not reporting to the municipality but reporting to a central government body, just to give you one small, not so small example, then they will depend on redistribution and the will of they have to be loyal to the central power. So to a degree, we are, but not we. I'm not part of. I don't consider myself part of that, but the ruling regime in Hungary is recreating a kind of one-party state, where the state and the party is completely overlapping, like it did in the 1950s to end of 80s, under a different ideology. But that is not just changing the economic structure of the country, but it's changing the mentality of people. The criteria of success in society is, again, being loyal to the system, to the regime. Competition is being competitive, being in a market economy is less relevant than being in the network of the ultimately centralized regime. So I think it's after such a long period of going in one direction, whenever, I don't expect anything to change quickly, but whenever there is a change, it will be very, very difficult again to turn back to a different route, if at all that is possible.
So sort of like steering an ocean liner, it will not turn back quickly.
What we learned, I quoted Sir Ralph Dahrendorf, is it can take 60 years to change society. We went in one direction with ups and downs and difficult periods for about 20 years, the first 20 years after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and in the last 14 years we are gradually turning away from that, getting to a situation where I think the regime that governs Hungary is basically incompatible with the way the European Union is built and run today, based on the values, the way it operates, and therefore I'm very sadly and pessimistically expecting a conflict between these two, and I don't think that long term either this regime is not sustainable and Europe and then we'll have to somehow get out of Europe, which I would very much not like to have. I would be super. I would think it's tragic to be, but that's probably a path. Or Europe needs to change substantially away how it operates today, and that was the stated intention of the regime in Hungary, to create a coalition to change Europe hugely away from where it is today. So I don't think this cohabitation can be maintained for a longer period, and the problem of the regime in Hungary, they don't have a majority vote in the country to get out of the EU. The majority of the population is still pro-European, but there is heavy work being done to change that public opinion, and very systematic for the last over 10 years. And the other problem, and I'll stop here, is there is no economic solution to that problem. The next day, the Hungarian economy would collapse. Those Chinese or German car manufacturers who are in Hungary would leave the country if that happens. So I don't think there is a timeline or a deadline for this to happen, but there is a strategy, because the regime is not compatible with the European Union as it works today. That's my probably very negative view of what is about to happen.
Well, let's now go for a more optimistic note. Prime Minister Dzurinda, some Central and Eastern European countries were right about Russia when so many others were wrong. Can those countries now lead? Is this their time to step forward together?
Yes, I believe that we are relatively strongly united around Ukraine. For some politicians, it is advantageous to play a role of peacekeeper or something like that. But in general, a vast majority of our citizens in all Eastern European countries are united around Ukraine. We understand the danger of Kremlin. We understand that this is a European neighborhood which we face. So in principle, I believe that the coalition of willing, connected around Poland, will continue the effort to curb Putin and his regime in Kremlin. The question is that how should be stronger? How to create a political strategy, how to do that in cooperation with the United States, maybe in the umbrella of NATO. It is not enough.
So there's not a strategy, you think, right now?
In my eyes, we are missing such a strategy. We assist Ukraine, we encourage the country, we receive refugees fleeing Ukraine, but in my eyes, this is the biggest weakness of the Western world in these times. The lack of clear political, maybe also military strategy. I am not a soldier, but in politics, I miss that element.
So you're saying we're throwing money, we're investing, but we don't have a plan.
Look, United States is paying. The European Union is paying. It is also costly. Either we want or not, we are a stakeholder of the process. We have not only a right, but also an obligation to talk to the main actors of the event. It means to Ukraine and also Russia. I'm getting nervous a bit because at the beginning, Monsieur Macron was visiting Kremlin on permanent basis. Now, no one is talking to these people. We need to talk to both of them, in Kyiv, but also in Moscow, as Europeans as well.
Chancellor Kurz, what do you think about those remarks, but also are Central and Eastern Europe finally rising?
I don't think so, to be honest. So I give you one example. In the days when I was foreign minister, the Visegrad Group was extremely united. Yeah, so there was a common understanding on nearly everything.
And respected.
And at the same time, there was, because of migration, also a very emotional issue where they were all totally aligned. And my feeling in these days was that, of course, Germany and France were leading, but there was always a third voice, and that was the Visegrad Group. So you had three main powers in the European Union: Germany, France, and the Visegrad Group. Now, mainly because of different views on how to deal with Russia, the Visegrad Group is not that united anymore. I would say there is still a common understanding on many areas, but not on Russia, which has now become the main issue and the most emotional issue after migration. And because of that, they are not as united as they were in the past. And I would say, yes, Poland is strong because it's a big player, but there's not the same power of the group compared to how it was 10 or 5 years ago. So from my perspective, I would not say that the region is on the rise politically when it comes to the power in the European Union. And also on Ukraine, I'm very skeptical and I'm not very optimistic, to be honest, because my feeling is whenever a war starts, there's huge support. Yeah, but the longer it takes, the more people find out that it has a price, that there's a cost. Yeah, and I see less support than at the beginning among people in Europe. It's probably different in some Eastern European countries. It's probably different in the Baltics. It's definitely different in Poland. But that if you look at other countries in the European Union, there's definitely less support. And especially, and that's the most important thing, I think the policy in the US is going to change. There will not be the same support as it was in the last few years. So from my perspective, it's needed that there are talks soon and that we all try to find a way out. And I'm scared looking ahead. If you look a few months ahead, I think the winter will be extremely difficult. The infrastructure in Ukraine is very weak now. A lot of damage has been caused. So I think this will be more and more difficult also for people in the country. So on that, I don't have a very optimistic view. I think we are in a situation where a new strategy is needed.
Prime Minister Topolánek, before we go to audience questions, I wanted to ask you this final question. Nationalist and populist parties, as we've seen, are on the rise in so many parts of Europe, so many parts of the world. Yet in Czechia and Poland, liberal parties won the day. How did they do it? What was their secret?
I think we have to start. With question why people, because problem of people, believe more the populists than the value-oriented politicians. It's reality in whole Europe. I think there are two sides of the false coin. On the one hand, for me, some new themes, new culture wars, progressivists, and some gender question and so on, and created the second part. We are Czechs, we are Polish, we are Hungarian, and so on, and these populistic and nationalistic tendencies. We learned each other to label people. You are fascist. We are a little bit conservative, you are fascist. When you are a little bit left-oriented, you are neo-Marxist. And this labeling and this simplification of the problem dividing the society more than before. It is very difficult now, not only in Central Europe, in Europe generally, in the Western civilization generally, to win election with some value-oriented politics. It is impossible. You have to be populistic to win elections. That's why the society is moving. And this crisis, financial crisis 2010, 2011, COVID crisis, new financial crisis, energy crisis, the war in Ukraine increase these tensions, these fears, and people believe many simple sentences and black and white vision of the world and so on. It will be very difficult to change it. We have to stop to lie to people. The first lie is because politics is working with two values, threat and hope. We lie to people that the biggest threat in the whole world are climate changes. And the hope is we will reduce CO2 emissions, we will win. We will save the planet. It is a big mistake. People don't believe it because they have a big fear from Russia, from the war, from the nuclear war, from poverty. And when we won't be able to substitute these threats and these hopes, we are going to the hell. Yeah.
Sorry, can I add just one word, because I liked a lot what some parts of what you said, but I don't really like the term populism in politics, because my feeling is whenever you like the result of elections, it's fair and free elections and it's value-based, and if you don't like the results, it's populism. So I like what you said, because arguing against green positions, they would immediately say that's populism, what you said, yeah? So I have the feeling if the left says tax the rich, it's populism. If the far right says no migration, it's populism. I think we should be a bit more careful with the term populism and have a bit more respect for democratic elections, because I think we all like our liberal democracies. If every successful campaign, if every successful politician is seen as a populist, we are in a way challenging our own system. That's just my thought on that.
Prime Minister Bajnai, you wanted to chime in.
Jumping on this boat, so I think the secret of populism that it's popular, and in a market where you win by having the most votes, you have to be popular. And the vote of a 75-year-old pensioner and a 19-year-old university student and a 35-year-old engineer or security guard is the same. So So politicians are, just simple market terms, are incentivized to maximize their profit by achieving the biggest market share of votes. So if those are the rules, and those are the rules in the better parts of the world, you have to be popular. There are two fundamental topics of politics in normal times: redistribution, social welfare issues, economic issues, and the other one is identity politics. And what has changed in our region, back to the original question of this panel, I think the 1990s and the first half of 2000, up until 2002, 5, 6, at least in Hungary, was dominated by redistribution questions. Who pays how much tax? Can you retire early or not? Which was a huge question after the collapse of the socialist communist industry. Can you retire early on? How much the state is giving you, and therefore how much is it taking away from those who pay tax? So taxes went up. The number of people become state dependent has grown. Politicians were inspired to give more and more through redistribution. But
not only in Hungary, also in other.
No, I'm just most familiar with my country, but I think it's it's pan-European issue.
Global problem.
Look at the French pension reform. My government had to increase retirement age from 62 to 65 in the biggest financial crisis.
I think in the US now it's 67, right?
And that was the single most unpopular measure of my government. We had many unpopular measures, but this was standing out. So I have some sympathy with President Macron's troubles now. But so what I wanted to say, there is the economic, social redistribution topic, but in our countries, as Mirek talked about that, is recently the identity politics took over and became the dominant issue. National identity, religious identity, and sort of negative definition of identity, whether you're against sexual orientation or certain types of beliefs, and that is actually much stronger. Economic positions can change, but identity politics binds voters much more strongly, and that recognition was very well applied in some of these countries, not just these countries. If you look at the US election, there is also a very strong identity element there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Let's go to the Slido questions, and then we'll jump to the room. So if someone has a question, raise your hand, and we will have someone bring you a microphone. So if you want to get ready, let's go, though, to, let's see, what do we have? About the first question here. As Hungary continues down their current political path and Slovakia is seemingly headed in a similar direction, what does the future of the V4 look like?
I think that the regional cooperation is very natural. We should not exaggerate the political meaning of that, even though it is good if a number of countries connected on natural basis, on historical experience, are united. It is good. Visegrad 4, I remember not only the meetings of Visegrad 4, but I remember when Slovenia and Lithuania wanted to join, because we enjoyed high respect and reputation. Then, this is why then we created a special formula V4++. And I remember that in Hungary, we had Tony Blair. In Poland, we had Gerhard Schröder. In Slovakia, we had Wim Koch. We had Yanukovych also with us. And I remember that before the EU summits, it was a normal habit that the leaders of Visegrad 4 were meeting with the European leaders. In these days, it is different due to the development in Hungary and Slovakia. But we are still here. If I have a look in my country as a sprinter, I would say that we face a relapse, political relapse. But if I have a look as a marathon runner, I would say this is just an episode. We overcome sooner or later. So Visegrad 4 has a sense. Such sense as Nordic cooperation or the Benelux or cooperation of Balkan countries. So I still believe that we should stick to this tradition, to this cooperation, and develop it.
Thank you. Let's go to the room. Does someone have a question? If you would, raise your hand, and they will bring a microphone to you. And if we are all still thinking about our excellent questions, then I will go back to the Slido app and see. All right, let's go to the Slido app. Let me just pick one here. Let's see, okay, well, the one that's on the top of my pad says, the example of Slovakia and Poland is inspiring and proves that changes are possible in any country. In what year will Ukraine join the EU? Even during the war? Who wants to take that one?
To be honest, I don't think that it's realistic that a country joins the EU during a war, but I also think that sooner or later there will be no negotiations, so I don't think that we will have the war as it is now in 2026. So I think latest next year. I hope there will be a way to out and negotiations to come.
My contribution to this question is that Ukraine will join the EU when fighting is stopped, with the real prospect of sustainability.
Yeah, I saw you reacting.
I am a bit more skeptical. Maybe it is a very difficult question, and without the peaceful development, and some dreamers in this conference are usually announce Ukraine must win the war. I think the main target must be Ukraine must not to lose the war. It is more important because it is impossible to win in spite very massive help in weapons and so on. Ukrainian way to European Union will be very difficult, and it is not question of today, it is question of 10, 20 years. But they have to have this dream and this positive influence of this way. So to change rule of law, to change, to reduce corruption, because every war increase corruption, not decrease, as everybody is listening now, and so on. Yeah? And this way will be very, very, very difficult. I wish to Ukraine. I was there 100 times from 90s to this year, and the society is not prepared, and the war must finish. It's the first precondition to start some discussions.
Prime Minister Bajnai.
Just to add, first, I think there is a false and somewhat cynical realism that describes Ukraine as a proxy war only between the US and Russia and China in the waiting room. Those are all obviously realpolitik existing factors, but it kind of completely discounts the will of the Ukrainian people who are dying for a dream of belonging to the West, which in our countries many people are quite skeptical about now. But interestingly, those who are out want in. Those who are in are getting skeptical, I think, for the wrong reasons. But those people are dying to get into the European Union, and therefore we should respect that, and we should not take hope away from them. But I'm not in politics today, so it's just as a citizen. The other thing I wanted to say is, Ukraine joining the EU requires not just, I agree with that, not just a sustainable peace situation, it also requires the EU to change its operations. Because the EU internal operations cannot be managed already in the current format. It's a lame duck, it's creating, especially in foreign policy, but many other areas, it's creating constant disappointment and punches below its weight. And unless the EU is able to reform itself internally, to be able to receive new countries, it will not have the political consensus to receive those. So, and that's less bloody, but equally difficult than stopping that war, in my observation.
Okay. Can I add just one thing? So I like the idea of not taking away hope of people where hope is needed. At the same time, I think it's also good to be fair and transparent with partners and not to create hope which will never become a reality. And I think.
False hope, you're saying.
Yeah, and I see it a bit in the Western Balkans, for example. So if you look at the Western Balkans, there was a lot of hope, there was a lot of enthusiasm, there was a lot of support for the idea of becoming members of the European Union. There was a clear plan, there was always said it's not a political decision, you have to fulfill criteria. So it's all about the criteria, it's not a political decision. If you look at the situation now, because of the war, and I understand that there's a huge focus on Ukraine. Ukraine took a major step, yeah, and at the same time, nobody talks about the Western Balkans. So you have population there who sees that it's probably not only about fulfilling criteria. You have people there who now learn that the focus has completely shifted, and this causes frustration. So from my perspective, I like the idea of not to take away hope, but at the same time, I think we have to be careful not to do the same mistakes too often.
But I don't think it's contradicting. I'm with you on that. I think the Western Balkans, we have been making a strategic mistake, we as Europe, for a very long time. In geopolitics, there is no vacuum. Those countries have been standing in a queue for a very long time, waiting to get into the EU. We keep them waiting. And after a while, if you stand in a queue and it's not moving, you tend to join a shorter, faster queue. And there are many people offering those from the east, from the southeast and the northeast.
But it's not their fault. It's
not their fault.
Yeah.
I think it's us. And therefore, I think the EU, I would think the right course of action is the EU to agree to EU countries, agree to reforms which allow the EU to offer a relevant future for the Western Balkans and Ukraine, which is inspiring for them, and which allows the EU to operate in such an enlarged version, which cannot be the current status quo.
Prime Minister Topolánek.
It's brilliant discussion, because we moved from Central Europe to EU, because the problem is not only in Ukraine. Europe is not prepared for enlargement. Yeah? We have to reform, but deeper integration is not the goal. It shouldn't be. It won't be in order. Yeah? And this discussion, we are not prepared for this discussion inside European Union structures. It is one of the biggest problems. The problem of Ukraine is internal, maybe, but Europe is not prepared. Generally.
So it sounds like on this 20th anniversary of so many of these countries ascending to EU membership, you have essentially buyer's remorse. Was it not what you expected it would be?
No, but I think what is very true and what is clear is if you want to have enlargement, you cannot have a deeper and closer union at the same time. Yeah, it's either being bigger and more diverse, or being smaller and having an always closer union. So I think these two goals don't really fit.
We went horizontal in the past, and now we need to go
Vertical.
And Gordon is very right. We need to change our decision making. We need to promote our internal reform. And the problem is that we need unanimity when it comes to foreign policy issues and defense security. And we all know where the elephant in the room is. I like my old friend Viktor Orban, but it is difficult to promote such changes with him if he's putting his leg every morning at the door. So this is our weakness. Maybe, Mirek, maybe I would say we are ready mentally, psychologically, by institutions. But the problem is, in my eyes, the question how to overcome this blockage in these days.
I am the biggest Eurosceptic from this panel, maybe. I think we have to come back to the base of European values. We have to come back to economic cooperation. We have to resign from such common policies in this situation now. will be maybe, and the European Union is not prepared for this discussion to be principle of a la carte. We don't have euro. We don't have any problem.
But you pay by euro more and more. You pay with euro.
Of course, why not? Yeah. Why not? But I think this discussion is about bigger, maybe free access, and we have to define, it is the biggest problem, to define the smallest overall or common principles fulfilled for everybody, in every time. It is discussion about veto principle and Hungary approach sometimes and so on, but the discussion is not prepared, and the elites from European Union are not willing to start this discussion this way.
I think I will give the elephant in the room the last word and brief.
I don't feel like an elephant.
Thank you.
But I didn't want to comment specifically on Hungary. What I wanted to reflect on is, yes, I think we should go back to the basics. What is the mission of the European Union? What's the raison d'être that European Union exists? I think it changed a lot. It was a coal and steel union, and basically to stop the war coming back to Europe. Then it became a social project. Then it became an enlargement project. But since the early 2000s, it's with globalization and the global reshaping of global powers, the European Union's mission for its citizens is to allow us to survive with our European values and lifestyle. Because no country, even the largest economy, Germany, could not be competitive in a world where economic and sort of defense and other powers coincide. Only this scale of market and this scale of power together can help us to maintain our relevance. This basically, in politics, there is a saying: if you don't sit at the table, you will find yourself on the menu. Mm-hmm. And the question for the European Union is whether it finds itself on the menu or it can stay at the table where decisions are made. And that we can only achieve in a larger format. Now, this format has to allow for national identities. I don't want to be a European only. I want to be Hungarian as long as I live and my kids and grandkids live. And I want to keep that identity. But if we let Europe down and don't reflect on these external challenges, then we will become irrelevant and we will be exploited.
Thank you all for just a fabulous discussion. Audience members, I'm sorry we don't have time. I wish you had raised your hand earlier. But please thank my wonderful panelists, Prime Minister Bajnai, Prime Minister Dzurinda, Chancellor Kurz, and Prime Minister Topolánek. Thank them and enjoy. We are going to break now for coffee. We will see you in 15 minutes in the next session, which is Empowering Europe, Bringing the Critical Technology Gap for Security and Resilience. So we will have this 10-minute, actually, coffee break, not 15. But please join me in thanking this fabulous panel. They were really wonderful.